folks join, and then we'll kick off the session. Thanks. Hi, see, it's Phil. I think we can get started. Just let me know when the recording has started, and I can start my introduction. Okay, so I'm going to assume that we're recording at this point, but welcome everyone this afternoon to this session on the NSTIC pilots. My name is Phil Lamb. I'm from the NSTIC National Program Office. As some of you know, the NSTIC has three main pillars that we look to achieve the identity ecosystem as described in the strategy from the President. One, of course, is this public-private, privately led identity ecosystem steering group that you're all participating in. The other being the NSTIC pilots, and of course the other being federal adoption. Today we're here to listen to some of the outbriefs of a few of these NSTIC pilots. You'll be hearing from state implementations that are impacting citizens across Michigan and Pennsylvania, as well as a few private sector and educational space implementations from the Motor Vehicles Administration, from Privo, and from UCAID as well. Today we will be having these 5 presentations, and then following that there will be a Q&A. We encourage you all, as you are listening to these presentations, to put your questions into the chat box, and we will be addressing the questions at the end of all the 5 presentations. So with that, I welcome Kathy Fitch from Michigan Department of Health and Human Services to start off the first presentation. Thank you, Kathy.
Good morning, depending on where you are. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry, we had some connection problems. I was trying to get into the wrong meeting. With that, I'll give the caveat that I am a trained social worker, not a technology expert, and there's some evidence of that fact. So, yes, my name is Kathy Fitch. I work for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. I have some other folks in the room with me, so sort of my team, some of our technology folks, and then Abby Meyer, who is a consultant working on the project with me, sort of a right hand and very helpful. They will probably be joining me in giving this presentation, as each of us have sort of our areas of expertise in explaining things. So I kind of wanted to give a little bit of a review and overview, because I think some of you have probably heard our, story before, and some of you probably haven't. And so I want to give you a little bit of a background, but also kind of bring you up to speed on where we are right now. So when we were awarded the grant from NSTIC, or the cooperative agreement, we were the Michigan Department of Human Services. Executive order of Governor Snyder in April of 2015, our department, or DHS, joined with the Michigan Department of Community Health. This made us makes us the largest state agency in the state of Michigan, not only in terms of staff, which is around 16,000 people, but also in terms of our budget. We administer and sort of out to Michigan citizens federal funds, state funds, and this comes from a multitude of different sources. And essentially, we are in charge of all the public benefit programs in the state of Michigan. In addition to that, we are the child welfare agency for the state of Michigan, so child protective services, foster care, adoption. So we're massive, and we have many different sort of missions that we need to accomplish. And with that, we face a great deal of scrutiny, not only from our federal funders, but from advocacy groups, from the 2.3 million citizens that we serve. So it's very important that everything we do and each decision we make is done carefully within the rules, and so it offers the greatest benefit to those who are truly in need, because we are essentially the safety net for at-risk citizens in the state of Michigan. We administer about $223 billion in funds from both the federal government and from state programs. So in October of 2013, we started this pilot. Seems like forever ago now. Sorry, I'm going to advance the slide here. Oh, I'm able to advance the slide. So, Tracy, I don't know if you can do that for me. I'll just continue on and okay, thank you. So in October of 2013, we were awarded $1.7 million from NSTIC to implement an identity verification authentication pilot into our MyBridges action for benefits. And that is an online citizen-facing portal where Michigan citizens can go in and apply for a variety of public benefits, from food stamps to cash assistance to state emergency relief and medical assistance. And others. So the purpose for implementing the identity verification and authentication pilot was kind of twofold. One was to provide hopefully some worker relief, so kind of streamline our process. Up until the implementation of the pilot, and even ongoing in some situations, our eligibility specialists in the field and located all over the state of Michigan were responsible solely for identity verification. And identity verification could look a number of different ways based on the program that the person was applying for. With the pilot, we now have a process where we can do an instant verification of a person's identity. And so where that's successful, we are seeing some worker relief in terms of processing benefit applications. Their part or component or objective for the pilot to be privacy enhancing for citizens applying for benefits, and to help us in terms of have a better process for identity proofing, taking some of the subjectivity and potential worker error out of the process. This is the home page for the MyBridges application. Citizens going into MyBridges can do a number of different things. They can apply for healthcare coverage only, and this is a relatively new functionality of the system based on the Affordable Care Act and expansion of Medicaid. And they also apply for other benefits. They can apply for multiple benefits, so any combination. So maybe they want to apply for health care and food stamps. Maybe they want to apply for cash assistance and food stamps. Or maybe they want to apply for and see if they're eligible for the full array of benefits. The other thing that they can do is they can do their case. If they have an existing case with us or receiving benefits, they can go in and they can do a number of different things. And I'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about our multi-factor authentication component. So what we've done is, working with our vendor, LexisNexis, we have implemented an identity verification and authentication solution into MyBridges. At this point, the identity verification can happen at a number of different points. So when submitting to apply for a benefit, or a multi-benefit application, when saving and exiting when they're applying for benefits, when submitting for healthcare coverage only, so you saw those icons back on the previous screen where they can do those things, and then when saving and exiting from a healthcare application. There we go. So you can see, sort of where I have a star and the arrow going down. Anytime someone's saving and exiting during the process of their application, the verification and authentication could be invoked. So it says Instant Verify. That's the first transaction that we have with LexisNexis. So MyBridges would make a call to LexisNexis, including just a very limited amount of information. Because of sort of the governing rules of the various federal agencies that we work with, we're really only able to provide name and address. If someone provides date of birth, that information would also go to LexisNexis, but it's not a requirement. The person's identity is verified by LexisNexis, a Lex ID is returned. And simultaneous to that, the user or the recipient or applicant would be a knowledge-based authentication quiz. Every single applicant is presented with a KBA quiz. This is because, again, of federal rules, every person who's applying for benefits has to have sort of the same experience. So they're presented with 4 questions. There may be any number of diversionary questions that are presented depending on the person's, public footprint. So the amount of information that's available from LexisNexis to create questions. And I know you're all very familiar with what KBA looks like. This is how it's presented to our users or applicants. There is an opt-out option, and I know that it's difficult to see on the screen, but at the very bottom, they can click in a box and opt out of KBA. The requirement to complete KBA to submit an application, to save and exit, as an impact a person's benefit determination. So on the sort of our business end of things, we've made some changes to what our workers see when they receive an application from MyBridges. So one has gone in and completed and submitted their application. The workers receive a PDF of the information that's included in the application. We added this field that is outlined in red, where the IV/INV. This means identity verified or identity not verified. And if number 1 appears in that field, if the person's identity is verified. That means the worker can bypass the manual verification methods that they have traditionally used to verify that person to move them further into the benefit determination process. If it appears, it means the person's identity is not verified, and the worker would then revert to those manual processes that they used. So kind of it for Verify and the KBA portion. We are also implementing a multi-factor authentication component within the system, and this was a requirement of our cooperative agreement, and it's something that we're just now getting ready to implement and make live for our users. So we sort of grappled with where to invoke MFA within the system. Initially, we thought that we were going to use MFA when a person would come into MyBridges after they have an existing case and want to make changes to their case. So if they wanted to change their address or their income information or things like that. We sort of dug deeper into what information is available in the View My Case area, so where they could report changes, but where they can also view correspondence. We also realized that there's a great deal of personal information in those places, and so we decided that we wanted to invoke MFA anytime someone is coming into any transaction within that View My Case component of MyBridges. A piece about MFA for us is that we decided to sort of in-source creation of MFA. So not using LexisNexis for any component of this. We're using existing MyBridges functionality. So MyBridges already had the ability to send text messages and email messages. And so we are using both that SMS text capability and the email capability for the multi-factor component. So we hope to gather the person's information on the front end. They provide a mobile number and email address when they're initially creating an application or creating their case. Sometimes people don't provide that information, so we're giving them the opportunity to provide that information when they come in to associate their case with the MyBridges system so that they can use it ongoing. But we want to be able to verify that the phone that they're using and the email address that they're using is actually theirs. And so we can do this by having the person enter a code, confirming their identity, and confirming the device that they're using. We've done that. So when we've done that, the person, if they have given a mobile number and an email address, they're given both of those options to do the MFA component. Only provided a mobile number, only that option will come up, along with the option to use their security questions. We recognize that using the security questions is not MFA, but what we have to do is give people the opportunity to have access to their case information. Again, that's part of the federal rules that govern the way we do business. So if they provide both a mobile number and an email address, they can select their preference, and they will receive a one-time password or a code to their device or to their email address. And they will put that code into MyBridges. So there'll be some questions in terms of the number. I'm sorry, I keep toggling back and forth. How many times that they can read the code before they're locked out, and address those specifics in the Q&A as they come up. So metrics and evaluation. We've been able to collect a great deal of information since the time of implementation, and we are doing frequent analysis with our vendor and with the help of the MPO, and kind of trying to uncover some of the things that we're seeing in terms of performance of the solution. What we know is that we have had, as of May 14th, 321,000 or almost 322,000 unique applications were submitted and through the identity verification and authentication process. But we have a great deal more transactions than that, and so we're sort of looking at where we may have a high number of duplicate transactions and sort of trying to parse those out and determine what's happening there. So bad actors coming into the system and trying to sort of beat the KBA in order to receive benefits fluently, are the people who are struggling with the KBA and, continuing to try to go through it. So those are things we're sort of trying to figure out at this point. We have a relatively high number of opt-outs, and we believe that part of that may be due to a need for outreach and education, both to Michigan citizens, but also to our partners who help with applications in different settings. So we're working on that, and we're also gathering information from them. I'm very lucky to have RTI International helping us with our evaluation. They're collecting information from the end user in the beginning. So sort of a lengthy survey that our applicant can opt in or opt out from. They may receive an incentive for participation, and we've had a high level of participation, which is very unusual for us. We've been able to collect a lot of valuable information that helps point to the experience and then some of the course corrections that we're moving toward now. A lot of lessons learned as well. Solution design is a big one. We're making some changes now to when we plan to invoke the KBA quiz. I noted early on in the presentation, the KBA can be invoked in a variety of different places now, and can receive the KBA quiz more than once. So we're moving to sort of a streamlined version where the KBA will only be invoked at the end of the application. I had the opportunity to have a really informative call with the state of Florida, who is working with a similar solution for, I think, 3 or 4 years now. And they have their solution designed in that same way, that the KBA is only invoked at the end of the application. Training and outreach and education I sort of would lump all together, and I mentioned it earlier. We did do a fair amount of communicating and marketing and public awareness at the front end, but what we've realized is that we really need to get out and help both our partners, our workers, and Michigan citizens who are applying understand the value of participating in the process or using the solution. Those lessons learned, again, are leading us to some course corrections, and some of our current activities are around that. Again, we're making some configuration changes. Another change that we're making is that when a person goes to opt out, a screen will pop up that says, "Are you sure you want to opt out?" This could increase the length of time it takes to determine your eligibility. And then again, moving the place in which the quiz is invoked. We're also, again, trying to gain a better understanding of the end-user experience through days, and we're also surveying DHHS staff and our community partners to find out their experience in helping individuals go through the process. So what kind of feedback are they hearing? What kind of concern are they hearing? Are giving any advice in terms of how to deal with the quiz, that sort of thing. And then more outreach and education. We're also doing some planning for post-pilot. Michigan is also in the process of developing an enterprise solution for identity management, and so we're working with that enterprise team to figure out how we eventually get to that solution. And our pilot team, these are the sort of 4 core members, but we have a much bigger team than that. We've all been very close through this process. We spend a lot of time together. So that's it for us. We look forward to answering your questions during the Q&A.
Thank you. And for the participants who are attending, if you do have questions, please feel free to insert them into the Q&A chat box, and then we will be addressing them after all the presentations have concluded. So thanks again, Kathy, from Michigan. Next, we'll be hearing from Frank Morrow and Piyush Pandey on the Pennsylvania pilot.
Morrow, and this is Piyush Pandey. Let's see. Chrissy, do you have us up there? Hello? Okay, like Michigan, we got the grant back in 2013, and we were partnering with what was then our Pennsylvania Department of Public Welfare, and this past year it was renamed to the Department of Human Services. It's our largest state agency with 20-some-odd thousand workers, and also covers everything from child welfare to medical assistance to long-term assistance and so on. Very large variety of programs. And we've been working with our Department of Health as a party, our Department of Transportation as an identity verifier along with Experian, and our Department of Human Relations Commission as a relying party as well. Our purpose was to develop a online identity solution for accessing government services. This is NSTIC, and is shared across multiple agencies here at the Commonwealth. We've had as I'm sure most state governments have, of everybody building their applications in a silo. And as a result, a citizen or constituent who wants to deal with multiple agencies has to record where they do multiple entities, one for each agency or even one for each application within an agency. So, our objectives were to advance a single secure online credential and reduce fraud, stolen, outdated identities by using identity verification.
So Frank actually touched upon the challenges we were facing in the state government environment, and one of the things is, if you look at the slide, there's a history behind that. So as you can see, we have over 40 plus agencies, bureaus, and divisions, and these are the agencies who are providing benefits to the citizens of Pennsylvania. And in the online world, obviously they come in, they create their identities, and then they access those applications. And this is how the solutions and individual and silos were kind of building up. We started to develop a program where we tried to consolidate those credentials, those repositories, to ensure that the citizens who are accessing application, maybe in a common platform, use a single centralized identity management system. So that program was working for evolving pretty good. And as we looked at NSTIC solution, and we started to think of a framework where we can actually fast forward that process, and how we can not only expedite the process and also make it easy for the agencies and applications who would like to leverage this type of centralized credentialing system. So this is where we came up with the solution of Identity Exchange, which is basically a centralized system or broker which can facilitate the communication between the credential service providers on the one hand, the relying parties on the other hand, and also in between, if there is a relying party or agency or application which is looking for elevated credentials, we can also facilitate the identity proofing with this solution. So that was our vision, and we looked at that. We prepared a design template, and then we start implementation process in last year. So as of now, we have a foundation established where we have a centralized system, identity management, identity exchange system in place, integrated with one credential service provider on the one hand, and then also there are two attribute verifiers, as we call it, for the identity verification purpose. We have a PennDOT, Department of Transportation here, who verifies the driver's license and a state identification number. And also Experian is the third party who verifies the identity using knowledge-based question answers. And on the right-hand side, what you see in the future model is all the agencies. However, at this point, we have a couple of agencies onboarded, but the vision there is to really expand it further for all the agencies so that citizens of Pennsylvania have one credential and one process to access online applications provided by the government of state government. of Pennsylvania. Moving on to the next, so as I'm not going to go through each individual component of the technical architecture, but very high level, we have three key components here. The one is the identity exchange itself. And then identity exchange, by definition, this is a component which facilitates communication between the credential service providers and the relying parties. What it does is it transforms the messages coming from relying party and then forward that request to the credential service provider for the verification purpose or authentication. And then if there is a need to do the proofing, then it actually takes that message to identity verifiers, Department of Transportation and Experience to elevate the credential and make it level 2, and then forward it back to the relying party. So from the user perspective, although there are a number of components here, but from the user standpoint, it's a pretty seamless process. When the user comes to access relying party application, whether it's a benefit application or any other application which user will be accessing from the relying party perspective, the relying party will be integrated with the identity exchange using an open system-based plugin, Shibboleth plugin, which actually takes the user request and determine whether this application which user is trying to access requires a level 1 credential, which is a sole username and password, or level 2, which is a elevated credential used with the identity proofing done. So based on that information, that relying party will forward that request to identity exchange in a SAML message. Then identity exchange will interpret that message, transform that and forward that to the credential service provider. And if the credential is not elevated yet, it will actually take the request to the identity verifiers, verify the credential by asking certain questions to the user. And once the credential is verified, it will forward that message back to the relying party, which will allow user to access the application. So from the user, there are a number of hops here, but from the user standpoint, it's pretty seamless. User will go to the relying party, access it, and if there's a requirement to do the elevation of credentials, they will escalate it using the backend system. So that's at a very high level. There are other industry-leading components and technologies which we have used, but it's all standard. There are open system-based technologies, SAML and Shibboleth plugin, as well as industry standard identity and access management product suites as well. Moving to the next one. So here is the status of various applications which we have integrated or in process of integrating with this solution. Number one, as Frank mentioned before, is the Human Rights Commission application, which was earlier before this solution. They were using a paper-based process to collect application, identify users, and take that through the whole process of completing the application. After integrating with this solution, that process is completely online. User will go through verification process, apply for the application, and then complete that application online, and then they can purely view the status of that application or add to that if there is a need to additional information in that. But it's all in a secure transactions. Department of Health EMS, I think that application we are still in the process of integrating, but that application is where will facilitate the recording of training records and certifications by emergency medical services community. So it's going to be a kind of variety of from applying for the human relations and to the EMS and the emergency personnel. I think it's a good variety of applications which we are integrating here. Then the third one is the LIHEAP and Compass, and this is where we are looking to integrate with the solution to see how we can improve the efficiency of application processing by moving some of the processes online and avoiding the in-person verification process. So that's something which we are planning to do later this year. Future plan, this is as we look forward to the next. So there are a couple of things we are looking at for future. So as we look at this solution, there is a potential to integrate more credential service provider. And again, the driver behind that is how we can make it easier for the citizens to access application. And one of the challenge there is that they have to go through this cumbersome process of registration and providing all the information and then getting this credential. So how we can alleviate that requirement by actually integrating with the external credential service providers. So if they already have credentials, which may not be the level 2 assurance, may not be the elevated credentials, but even though they have a basic credentials, we can accept those credentials and have them allow them to log into the applications. And if applications require more elevated credentials, then we can take them through the identity proofing process, which is part of identity exchange feature set. Multi-factor authentication is another feature which we are trying to introduce in the upcoming months, and also obviously the other agency integration is going to be an ongoing process as we move and expand the solution. More agencies will join, more applications will join, and that's how the solution will evolve. So I'm going to over to Frank again to talk about some of the takeaways and the challenges which we have faced during the process.
Our HRC application is really the first to use the identity exchange, and it's only still in its rollout process. We don't have a whole lot of statistics or lessons learned based on the actual processes. We have learned, course of the half, is basically that there was a hesitation up front by some of our agencies. This is new, unproved, not standard, your favorite phrase. But some successes and talking to people, we're utilizing it and getting it more and more acceptable. Again, less than participation from some of the relying parties we'd hope to get because of the short time frame and seeing challenges. Many of the relying parties or the agencies had their own priorities. And in Pennsylvania, we had a change of administration back in the November election. A new administration took over in January, which did a lot of priorities across pretty much all the agencies as the new governor took over. Again, as we started getting some momentum, there was much more involvement and interest. Again, because of some of the changing priorities, were scope changes, different iterations. Working with the third parties, trying to understand their existing mechanisms and what they need from us to guide them. And so we've been working with getting involved with the other federal agencies. As been mentioned, there are federal requirements on what can or cannot be done. And we've been working with our Department of Human Services to try what those are and address them. Opportunities, we have additional agencies that we're working with, attribute providers, or verifiers and relying parties are part of that. We would like to get into some of the commercial or social media type credential service providers. That involves challenges as to what will be acceptable to our agencies, but again, we're working with them on that. And there's certainly the opportunity for more identity verifiers being brought online. So it's our contact information, Frank and Piyush. Thank you.
Thank you, Piyush. Well, and if anyone has questions, please insert them into the chat. And next, we have Jen Behrens, Mike Farnsworth, and Matt Thompson speaking on behalf of the AMVA pilot.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, Jen.
Well, thank you. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to present an update on the Cross-Sector Digital Identity Initiative pilot. And I wanted to thank you. Remind that the AMVA pilot is also known as CSDII, or the Cross-Sector Digital Identity Initiative, and throughout this presentation, we'll be referring to it as CSDII. Next slide, please. We are going to provide an overview, lessons learned, and provide a couple on operationalization. And just as we started this pilot effort as a group effort, we're continuing that way and accomplishing this presentation today. I will provide the quick overview of the pilot and the phases. Mike will provide some lessons learned, and Matt will follow up with points in regard to operationalizing the pilot. And that will be available for questions during the Q&A session. All are probably fully aware this is a year one in our third year pilot. We are a public-private partnership that came together to form an ecosystem. We are comprised of relying parties, identity providers, identity proofers, attribute verifiers, attribute providers, credential service providers, and other participants. We have several governing board members representing the Virginia Commonwealth Department of Motor Vehicles, CA Technologies, AMVA, BioSig, and Microsoft. We are an active consortium and have some of those lessons learned from trying to wrangle members from a lot of different industries and sectors, not to mention time zones and such. So we are a collective driving this thing forward. And our slide. Pilot again, CSDI encapsulates a composite proofing system which binds and memorializes 3 tiers of increasing identity insurance, what you have, through a privacy-enhancing vehicle. This focus on privacy enhancement ensures that data does not seep out to organizations, nor can organizations learn patterns about identity based on personal data. The CII objective is to leverage the Virginia DMV in-person identity and proofing to send a user's self-asserted online identity to an elevated level of trust, which then satisfy the relying parties with acceptable risk to an online service. We designated 3 distinct use cases or phases for CSDI. Our first use case we refer to as our provider use case. The ecosystem supports greater efficiency by enabling healthcare providers, as an example for this use case, to use a single ecosystem credential to access systems and platforms. There are numerous varying policy requirements related to trust, privacy, security, and authentication. CSI assists with the HR certification by enhancing the patient's right to access their own health information. We'll use MU1, transition of care, MU2, and help satisfy the requirements for MU2's view, download, and transmit standards. CSDO enhances the continuum of care by streamlining process, which focus efforts on patient care, which supports the core focus of MU3's improved outcomes. The ecosystem of healthcare providers from a diverse array of outside health systems, which is very interesting, and provider networks to access the participants' health information system with the requirement of a physical token or the manual process of accessing their records. All such as physicians, nurses, non-health system physicians with privileges at the health system, payers, etc., can access the system records through an identity proofing process. Also helps the help desk cost offset, as providers can be reused for digital identity, increasing the likelihood also of retaining their username and password information. Currently engaged with 2 major health systems as relying parties for this use case. Integration efforts are underway. We're targeting a planned pilot delivery with a few thousand providers in late summer 2015. Next slide. We have the patient use case, which is we refer to as our phase 3, and this is the use case which allows the patient to use one of their frequently used usernames and passwords, i.e. a social cred like Yahoo or Google or even Facebook, to register to their electronic health record, which increases the likelihood of patient consistency in knowing their username for their EHR. The registration process involves the patient-provider identity through a multi-factor authentication process, significantly reducing the chance of fraud as the patient has been proved identity as the patient through a multi-step process that confirms various aspects of their identity. Once composite proofing is complete, the patient can access their EHR at any time by simply using their everyday username and password combined with a phone call or text message to their cell phone. The goal of delivery of this patient use case is immediately following demonstration of the provider use case. We're engaged in discussions with a major health system planning for delivery after the provider use case with additional aligned parties. And I'm fast. Sorry. CAS is our phase 2, presented here as our third use case. The purpose of CSDI integration is to provide the Commonwealth, this is the Virginia Commonwealth Authentication System, as an alternate vetting service to create enhanced accounts when members are not identified in the Commonwealth Enterprise Data Management System or do not sufficiently have data to generate the 9 required KBA questions. CAS enhanced accounts provide the Commonwealth of Virginia agencies assurance that the customer identities are accurate and can provide CAS users more access to online services. CSDI provides a way for CAS customers to create the enhanced account who would otherwise not be able to access the Commonwealth Authentication or any of the agencies within the Commonwealth. People who are accessing CSDI for CAS this way do not have to have a Virginia driver's license, they may have recently moved to Virginia from another state or not have sufficient DMV data to generate, again, the KBA questions. We are shooting to provide a higher percentage of population with the authentication services for CAS, and therefore leveraging the CSDII as an external vet source gets us there. And we're also supporting integration with CSDI and the Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles for an in-person proofing event, which will wrap around and augment our actual provider use case as well. I'm going to pass the ball, or have Tracy pass the ball to Mike Farnsworth to provide us with lessons learned.
Hey, this is Mike Farnsworth. You all probably met over the last years, as Jen said. You know, it's been a very interesting journey. We were one of the year 1 pilots, and we're actually spanning into year 3, and have learned quite a bit over the journey with some of our parties. So I figured I'd kind of touch on it here. You know, first, I want to talk a little bit about the user experience. I know there's been a lot of dialogue out there about how streamlined user experiences can actually facilitate adoption, and how we consistently apply that across the actual events that somebody's interacting with CSDII in the system. And it's been very interesting because we've had a very diverse array of participants. Example is for one use case when we're working with the Commonwealth of Virginia, we're working with health systems, we're working with AMVA, we're working with Microsoft. There's a lot of opinions about how things should look, how things should flow, and how things should work. The common themes, though, that did come out is the fact that there's a great need for the ability to actually white label these solutions. And labeling, somewhat, and Matt will touch on this a little bit when we get to the things about operationalization, but when you start working on white labeling, you start running into issues with branding consistency and marketability. Everyone wants it to look their way, but anytime that gets changed or modified, it can sometimes cause challenges. And it's only just the visual representation that we ran into some challenges with. It's actually in some of the functionality. With some of the advances in web technology and responsive web design, being able to present these things on both desktop and mobile, the controls, even as simple as slider switches and radio buttons, there's often a lot of conversation about should they be used, can they be used, especially when participants are on different levels of technology implementation and they're looking for a consistent user experience. The user experience piece has probably taken longer than we had actually anticipated. Our going in mindset was that we would have a single user experience and then we would just simply brand it. But we quickly learned that wasn't really enough. Part of our pilot is built around identity brokering and the use of privacy enhancing technology. For example, when you're stitching together 3 or 4 or 5 of these participants in a user journey in order to accomplish one of the use cases, and each participant is running on a different technology stack, sometimes years apart. We had some challenges with some of the protocol mapping. It's very interesting. In the CAS use case, we went into it thinking that it was a simple 2-use case implementation. We were going to onboard the Commonwealth as a relying party, allow external federated credentials to actually be used, then also onboard them as an IDP, so if someone has one, that they could actually use it access services outside of the Commonwealth. And quickly learned was that there was a third one hidden in there that was of even greater value. As Jen kind of alluded to, it was actually being able to up-level credentials. Well, it was a little bit of a problem for us because some of the limitations of the technology we had in Virginia were limited strictly to SAML, and the use of SAML and attribute exchanges was somewhat challenging. So we do a lot of mapping between our protocols because other participants, we were going down the road of OAuth and OpenID Connect. And so making sure that we had a consistent exchange across the identity broker was key. And then kind of in the same spirit are dealing with the actual attributes. In order to streamline user experience, there was certain information that we allowed the user to share in order to pre-populate some of the forms, but they're stored in different formats in different places. And so data normalization was actually a topic that we assumed wouldn't be an issue. I mean, we kind of thought that it was something we might have to look at, but when we actually got into it, we started really running into a lot of effort in making sure that we had the attributes mapped, not only just to facilitate the user experience, but also make sure that we were able to translate them across protocols. Another thing that we actually learned is kind of the kind of to temper the emerging versus existing tokens that we could use for authentication. It's very interesting. What's referenced in 863 for authentication is there's a lot more technology that's coming out on the market that kind of can be incorporated and used that's not explicitly stated there. And so when you start looking at some older technologies and trying to implement them and integrate them to make a more responsive user experience, even start to push the envelope a little and test the waters on bringing things such as biometrics into the into the conversation. You kind of often get into these conversations around, well, that's kind of emerging and we're not ready to adopt yet. So kind of balancing not only the current state, but also being able to plan for a solution that can actually grow and bring on these emerging technologies. It's not letting me. Integration, as kind of alluded to in our participants, integration with a lot of these participants has been challenging at times. A lot of it comes down to timelines and prioritization, and as well as expectations. What each group is actually expecting to come out of that integration. What's the value add? What's their return on investment? Kind of natively assume that everyone would fundamentally understand what that return on investment was. I guess because we've lived in the space for a while. What we quickly came to realize is that there's a lot of education and a lot of business development that needs to be done with each of the participants so that they understand where they fit in the actual timeline for the pilot, what they're actually getting out of it, and then really, what needs to happen in order for the integration to actually occur. At the root of our whole pilot was around the introduction of privacy-enhancing technology to allow for these third-party creds to be used, in these highly regulated environments where privacy is paramount. We started to come across challenges around some of the technical expectations were on that, particularly in the security realm with the ISO community. There are certain technical expectations that a lot of organizations have around wanting to have audit data and the ability to track a user through IP addresses and things like that, to satisfy some of their requirements. But on the flip side, we were trying to balance that with some of the policy expectations, not only that were consistent with NSTIC and with our drive to put that in with the pilot activities, but also trying to account for some of the regulatory pieces around HIPAA, particularly since a lot of our work has been focused in healthcare space. And I think that one of the common threads that we came to realize in the pilot activities is the difference between theory and practice. We went in with some fairly concrete expectations or things that we wanted to accomplish as part of the pilot, and we feel that we've satisfied a lot of them. From trying to materialize theory or conceptual activity into something that's tangible and that's actually implemented, and balancing that with the practicality of actually getting it installed in these institutions and promoting the widespread adoption. So one of the suggestions that we offer to other pilots is make sure that balancing theory and practice and being able to effectively transition things from the R&D into the actual delivery arm are key.
On from Mike's last point about kind of getting things from theory to practice, we're also in the process of expanding the pilot and making sure things are set up to the CSDI continues to operate and create value in the ecosystem pilot, which is kind of a mutual responsibility of all the pilots across the board. So right now we're focused on kind of three main areas. First is expansion of the trust framework, and the framework that helped by CSDI is being made available to entities that want to operate that trust framework. And if you have questions about that or want to learn more about the trust framework or opportunities there, you can certainly reach out to me or Mike or Jen. Our contact information is available through the NSTIC site. We're looking the use of size trust framework within the health space outside of the two uses that are part of the pilot. And we're looking at other industries as well where this type of trust work would add value, as well as the privacy-enhancing technology that we're using to deliver social credentials to higher assurance type use cases. Back to you until Q&A.
And thanks, Mike, and thanks, Jen, from CSDAI and ID.me for the AMVA project. Next, we'll have Denise Taylor presenting for PRIBO.
I'm going to ask Tracy if you'll hand over the role to me, Tracy, and let me flip the pages. I know we had said otherwise. Oh, I don't see the role changing, so go ahead and flip to the next screen, please. Hello, can you hear me? Okay, so PRIVO, the acronym for Privacy Vaults Online, is a trusted third party for organizations who need to deal with the collection, use, and disclosure of children's personally identifiable information. And we do that as a Federal Trade Commission approved COPPA Safe Harbor. COPPA, for those who don't know on the line, is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. And as an FTC Safe Harbor, we consult and certify companies' compliance with use of children's personal information and other aspects of the law. We leverage the certification program to drive innovation in the product and technology suite that we offer to help enable these companies to manage the verifiable parental consent aspect. Next. The thing enabled under our grant were three prongs. One, we were create a trust framework for administering our own services. That framework, called the Mars Trust Framework, is a set of operational, technical, and legal policies that allow us to operate a federation around children's identity. That framework has been implemented and put into a separate organization that manages it, and we'll talk about that next. The PRIVO ID, or the Federated Identity Service that we offer, is really to manage both the identity credentials and the consent management process. It's a service that's free to parents and kids, of course, and companies pay a subscription fee in order to have the service outsourced that they would otherwise have to handle on their own. The solution includes an administrative hub for the RPs, administrative portal for parents, and a suite of services around registration, authentication, authorization, identity verification, and account management. And they can be implemented in a branded, co-branded manner. A couple of the things that we're working on right now is to improve or enhance the UI so that we can accept third-party credentials for account creation. We've demonstrated the ability to do that by moving everything to a common protocols off to OpenID Connect, SAML-enabled. Communicating this to parents when you're talking about the privacy of their children and accepting third-party social credentials is something that isn't necessarily easy to explain. So we're working on the UI for that front. And the other concept of third-party credentials is that we can accept them into our verification engine. The adult verification that takes place as part of our service is works on a sliding scale, and COPPA informs the level of verifiable parental consent that's required to authorize the collection, use, and disclosure of children's personal information. Adults enter our system, they might come in at various levels. When they're asked to verify their identity, they're given a choice of methods that they can choose from that they're most comfortable with. So we're not in a position where every parent is forced to go down a KBA path. Quite frankly, I'm unable to pass the KBA that I've tried, and so I thought it was important that we offer choice here. In those methods, we include offline methods and online methods, instant methods, and methods that take some time. But some of the unique areas that we're working on is to add both employer credentials under a listed approach and also employers that are sponsoring our educational initiative and offering derived accounts on our service to their employees. The last thing that I would say is that Privo, when Privo authenticates the users to the service at the RP, when they turn up that authentication widget or screen, we are in a sense acting as a blind. The parent may log into us through their third-party credential, but the relying party isn't following that process, and vice versa. All right, the screen that was up before, so I must be behind here. Screen that, if you could go back, yeah. The Generational Trust Alliance is the organization that we formed in order to house the Miners Trust Framework. So the idea is that regardless of the success of Privo as a company and its services that map to the Miners Trust Framework, the Generational Trust Alliance is a membership organization that will allow our work to continue and allow both competitors and others that are interested in this space to have a bar to be measured against. It is, its policies, I believe, are greater than what COPPA requires, and it also attempts to take in jurisdictional and other verticals such as FERPA, which is something the school systems and education have to deal with. You talked about the Miners Trust Framework being a set of the operational policies, technical and legal, and what's important is that Privo mapped all of its technology back to this policy framework. So we get the benefit of having known what the framework required as we were developing the next generation of the technology. All right, the next screen is a screen of our members, some of our members. And the purpose of this screen is to sort of walk you through the path of, we have a number of companies who use our bread and business, which is the consulting and certification, and those companies collectively work with hundreds of millions of accounts where kids and parents are creating login credentials at these services, or in cases where they're mobile apps downloading to their devices and using that to authenticate. That's sort of the first place that people call, when people call Privo, but it allows us to both introduce the Miners Trust Framework and the work they're doing at the GTA, and also to introduce the technologies that Privo has worked on. So some of those clients move, as you see at the bottom of the first section, to verification, where they handle all of their own account credentials but utilize Privo for the verification and parent-child attribute management. And then others, starting with A&E Networks, Pilot H, and others listed in the middle, have actually adopted our services to manage the verifiable parental consent aspect of their COPPA requirements. Those organizations in the middle have yielded just under 300,000 accounts, and we manage those accounts along that COPPA sliding scale. So they are not all fully verified, but in a sense are, starter accounts into the ecosystem. Just recently, we have signed a letter of intent with and are working through our implementation plans with two organizations, WeWorld and Yville, and collectively they have over 20 million accounts where there's I think maybe 50 or 60 million Wiis running around the universe right now. These sites are ones that are finding a need to move to mobile, and they've got legacy platforms that are more web-enabled, and so they are very interested in federating the accounts that they currently have and then using that process to engage with some of their users. And to also offload the work of registering COPPA-compliant accounts to the Privo system. So we're very excited about implementing these two organizations over the summer to drive our numbers to the expected numbers that we put into our original pilot application. Slide. So where we are, we work with brands. Those brands are either engaging kids in a commercial sense or attempting to educate them. And behind each child or student is, our parents, educators, and school systems, and all of these constituents are looking for ways to sort of manage and navigate the rules of the different privacy rules and data protection rules that they have to deal with. But what's important for us is that over this pilot period, there has been a major convergence where COPPA, commercial law, has found its way into education because educators are bypassing the platforms that they have contracts with and going straight to the marketplace to bring in apps and services to the classroom. And the rules are tightening on the ability for education to permission and authorize the use of children's data, especially if it leaves the school context and is used within a commercial context. So imagine a math app that's great for a kid in class, but he wants to use it at home and over the summer, and as he continues at another school, there isn't a good way for them to be able to make those handoffs without triggering more need for parental consent. So we see some big opportunity here for our services. Next slide. Thank you. One of the things that we uniquely have done in our pilot is that we have given and put in place granular controls over data attributes and mapped those to the features and activities and functionality that we are attempting to have permissioned by the parent. What does that mean? If you are a toy company and you have a catalog and that catalog needs to be mailed to the child's home, then you may need a full name and address to make that mailing happen. And those data attributes are associated to the permission request related to that feature. Where an online newsletter would certainly not need a physical address. In our first implementation, we call this the dynamic landing page. We worked on making those mappings, but you see in the first image, the original data provided by the child sat sort of stagnant at the bottom, and the features would have to be chosen in order to get to the next section. The second and third screens that you're seeing are what we're currently working on in a sprint now, which is our DLP2. And in that case, you will see that it is much more user-friendly from the standpoint of exactly what data is being mapped to what feature and functionality. And the additional data that is collected is driven by the allow or disallow of the features and functions. And as you get through each of the stages of this DLP, it collapses and then leads you to the next step. So in that third screen, you'll see something that we are adding as well, which is we found that some of the additional data needed beyond the data that would have already been established by the child or parent at a service, for instance, is sometimes we need very sensitive data. We have a client that administers a loyalty or a reward program for winners of the, and those programs have a MasterCard that requires a Social Security number associated to it because the prizes are at $10.99 value. And so we decided that we would separate and flag more sensitive data so that it would come into play in different points in our process, i.e. we're not going to collect very sensitive information from an unverified adult, but we may collect an email address from an adult who hasn't been as highly verified. Next, please. this point is just to say that we have separated our IDP from our consent management services in a sense that that DLP screen can shadow or be available to other services that are actually managing the identity itself. Mobile is a key enabler, and this is an area that we underestimated. I don't know how anyone could manage to underestimate mobile, but given the explosion of these devices used by children both in the classroom and in a commercial sense, we have to move our services to be mobilized. So one of the reasons for the new revised DLP2 was to make that interaction on mobile, but what we're also, working on is how we're going to deliver the actual consent process in a more streamlined way from the mobile apps and services that want to use us. The RPs that we're talking to are almost abandoning their web properties and running for mobile. So our one of our implementations with a mobile developer where we are the child account and parent account term registration service, Playground, and app Play Messenger, we went through a process with the Apple Store where we found out that they didn't like and didn't want identity verification taking place from within any of the apps. And so they forced us to go back to a previous way of implementing, which was to push out to a web and have through a simple redirect. So that was interesting. It took a couple months to work through that process. It'll be interesting to see how the stores continue to adopt the services that the ecosystem is trying to bring to market. Next, please. Educational initiatives matter for us. One issue, of course, is that parents don't realize that they have benefits under the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. So how do we help create that with the limited budgets that we have here at Privo? We created a foundation arm for technology and privacy outreach where we created educational curriculum, and that curriculum we call POPS, the Privacy on Patrol Squad and Online Privacy Matters campaign. And we have done a couple things. One, we've created activities. How do you create a password that you can remember and that's secure? Nobody's teaching kids why not to share that with their best friend. We have activities that the teachers and librarians will be able to use. We also have our one partner, Yville, who is in the business of creating interactive curriculum that's working on making that curriculum more interactive to have it available at Yville. And what was critical to them was that if they were going to adopt the Privo Federation for all their existing Yville members and for future ones, they had to be able to educate the consumer on why this was important. So it was a very key part of the relationship. And then our employee benefit program is being piloted by a major law firm and some other smaller organizations where they will offer the employees a benefit around data privacy and cybersecurity curriculum and reward them with a credential on our service that they can then manage their privacy vault for their children's benefit. Please. Next slide, sorry. So I think this has been iterated by others. RP adoption is hard. It's never easy to change the way people are doing things now, trying to break old habits. In our space, brands still resist admitting that they deal with the U13 demographic. They certainly don't want to have to ask a parent for consent. People bucket even asking us for consent that we don't want to take the time to read policies. I think parents will take more time with their children, but organizations are definitely afraid of drop-off. So they may choose or opt to abandon the 12 and under market and skew their services as up in age in order to avoid. or they may choose to only use exceptions or lightweight implementation under COPPA where they don't really offer the kid the experience they want, but it allows them to use notice and opt-out and opt-in without strong identity verification. So that's been one issue. The CTO is seamless for them. It's, making the APIs and all of our materials easier to read, having a demo site that we're putting together. All of these things were important for them to see how quickly and easily they could get up and running. Being able to deliver sort of starter, or we call them the Explore accounts, where kids may have nothing more than a display name and password to get going, or simple newsletter signups or single feature signups are where we're starting to get adoption, where people are dipping their toes into our federation. Just finding a balance in all things that would like to accomplish and the actual customer needs right in front of us, and keeping all of this in line with the guiding principles and our own principles. Pricing model, is always an issue because, as you can imagine, if you're app developer, you don't have a lot of extra pennies on your apps, especially when they're free to begin. So how we fit into the pricing models, we're finding that folks are willing to pay us for the certification, and we can throw in some of the technology, and that gets them started, and then they seem to like more of a platform approach, and where we're moving towards. So the thing that we would say on this front is that internationalization is critical, and we are behind on that. So COPPA, for instance, is a law that requires U.S. organizations to provide COPPA protection to children around the globe, and to organizations that are not U.S. to provide it to U.S. kids at a minimum. So our ability to verify and vet identity and manage parent-child attributes and provide methodologies in other jurisdictions around the world is something that is currently difficult for us and holding us back with a couple of our larger potential clients. So an area that we're working. I think the last slide is a wrap. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise, for that. And once again, as a reminder, if you do have any questions, please insert them into the chat window. And next, we'll be hearing from Ken Klingenstein, speaking for UK. Ken, are you off mute?
Yes, I am.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Thanks. Like CSDI, we are also a year one pilot. This is our third year, and you've heard perhaps too much of me already. So I'm going to focus on some of our most recent work in this space up front around consent management. And then near the end, when we get to the lessons learned, I'll touch on some of the other topics that we've been working on for the last few years, including MFA. So the original goal of our pilot was to provide an integrated implementation of a citizen-centric attribute ecosystem. So while the IDSG has been looking at the identity ecosystem writ large, we focused a lot on the attributes that would provide the authorization and access control for the ecosystem. The components that we have developed over time included strong authentication for privacy, have to begin with that piece of security. And normative schema for citizen-centric use cases. The schema would touch on things like privacy, including a long discussion about identifiers, accessibility, referencing the ISO standards in this space, applications that were properly domesticated, and I'll come back and touch on this because it's one of the biggest lessons learned and one of the challenges we have in trying to change the world going forward as an ecosystem. We also worked in the space of multilateral trust infrastructures. As many of you know, this work is based upon InCommon, which is an R&E federation with now over 700 participants, all sharing metadata and keys multilaterally. And so we've had IDPs and SPs and trust marks and all of the other aspects of that. And then the last piece, which is what we'll be focusing on today, is on the consent manager, both the UI and the infrastructure underneath that. And the thing here is that this is not an academic infrastructure project. It's real around deployments. And so we've been trying to make sure that all of this stuff gets deep root within our community. As mentioned before, the R&E community is special not only for its ability to tolerate leading-edge activities, but also for shaping the next generation of consumers. So if we can build expectations in students about both security and privacy, then we know that we're changing the landscape in the long term, even as we face the short-term challenges. Slide, please. So talking about Privacy Lens in the next few screens, just to give you a flavor for it, Privacy Lens is attempting to enable effective and informed end-user consent, much Denise was talking about earlier in Ivo. We want to embrace a set of capabilities about the information flow, that it's hierarchical, that there's fine-grained authorization, that attributes are bundled together, that you can revoke consent, that managing privacy is noxious enough in terms of its demand that you actually think and work through some stuff, that we want to make sure that users, once they've set their privacy settings, can't be bothered by having to re-enter those every time, but just receive some out-of-band notification that says attributes have been released according to your preferences, and allow people to move on with their days. There's a particular style of presentation in our UI, clear screens, layer values being sent, affirmative user actions. We put a lot of time into what those little click-through buttons say. They accept, continue, or yes, no's. And all of this stuff is based upon research that has been done at the Carnegie Mellon University's Center for Usable Privacy and Security. So we feel we're pretty well grounded in these issues, and I'll come back and talk about those near the end because there's some parts of the consent story that I think we have to be very careful about, including things like habituation, which does users as to the impacts of their decisions. We're doing this in a protocol-agnostic fashion. We're trying to make this scale at the enterprise level, and to do that, we're building it on an open consent management infrastructure. Next slide, please. Consent screen at work, and I'm not going to dive into all of the features of it, but you'll notice that if you hit the first line, the opaque user ID being sent, notice no toggle on that. There's no toggle because the application requires it. The other attributes are optional, and so they can be toggled. The impact of release on capability is essential for users to understand, and I can touch on that. You'll see that there are lines, when you say won't send, there are lines through the information. You'll also see there's a little blue eye button, which is the portal into the informed consent mechanisms. And we're considering a number of informed consent approaches beyond the hierarchical, federated, provided dialogues. We're thinking about reputation systems. What do my friends release as an informing mechanism for consent, et cetera. So that's a generalized API that will have access to a specific infrastructure, but also can be welded to other infrastructures as well. You notice also that there's the yes/no buttons at the end. One things in history right now is the suppression dialogues I mentioned earlier. We'll be moving that to the front screen because it's turning out to be important. So I released in this one an opaque identifier. If you can move to the next slide, please, you'll see that the application has responded with saying, okay, you're authenticated, that's great. You can see some things here that other people who aren't authenticated couldn't see, but notice that we don't know who you are yet because you released an opaque identifier. And so somebody provided a comment in the public discussion space that preserved privacy, and you knew it was a member of the community. I'll try a different release policy. Next slide, please. And we see the same consent screen, but now I'm sending personal information. You'll notice that the second line is will send, and the lines through the values have been eliminated. So I'm now sending some personal information, and if we could go to the next slide, I'm getting to see more screens because it knows who I am. If I clicked under that Watch or Tools button, it would say, okay, who I know who you are, here's what I know about you, etc. So we get more customization capabilities if we release more attributes. And that play back and forth between what you release and what you can do and what privacy you have that is central to engineering a proper identity ecosystem. Slide, please. So a hood of that GUI infrastructure, and we're just beginning to construct it now. So you can see the out-of-band notifications. We talked about that, where I might get an SMS message that said attributes had been released. Or every 2 weeks I might be notified about my consent policy and asked to refresh it. Lots of different ways of doing out-of-band notifications. The user GUI is the privacy lens you've just seen. The infant consent dialogues will be supplied by that support mechanism. Attribute name value mapping support. Inside our world, inside our directories, all these attributes have geek names, and yet we want to make them accessible to humans, and so we need a table that's going to translate them. The enterprise management console in the dark red. I won't go into all of that, all of those mechanisms, but they're around to federated information into the UI, to keep logs and audit files, and to orchestrate. There's the attribute source in gray, and in the purple is a re-engineered approach that we're now doing that will allow the consent manager to manage consent across a variety of protocols. So we started SAML, that's our world. We're now doing OAuth and UMA. We will be keeping the release policies in an UMA store, which is a very normative fashion. Next slide, please. Impacts. 140 students, 140 institutions are now in progressive deployments. There's 25,000 students alone at UT Austin now using MFA. I think this quote from MIT student is indicative of the fact that we may have been trailing the crowd. The student I've used MFA on World of Warcraft for years. I wondered when MIT would get to it. Well, MIT has finally caught up with World of Warcraft. The important impact we believe in the MFA space is not the large numbers of campus now deploying MFA, albeit in various deployment strategies, and we don't know that and we appreciate that we're conditioning students to MFA, but putting management infrastructure at the enterprise level turned out to be really important. What applications got MFA, what applications would do if MFA wasn't available because the user was in Tanzania on an archaeological dig and had no telephone service for second factor authentication. So there's a lot of management under the hood of doing an MFA deployment, and we built management infrastructures for a number of the software platforms that IDPs use. We were involved in the periodic table of trust elements. I think that was probably a year and a half ago at the Georgia Tech meeting when we first brought that up. We've done a lot of schema and identifier work. I'll suggest that the identifier work still needs to make its way into normative ESG glossaries. As we get further and further into the trust framework, we're going to want the specificity of certain characteristics of identifiers. And then lastly, we've been shaping the development of consent managers and a consent management infrastructure. That consent management infrastructure could work, should work with a whole host of different UIs. So you've seen the Privo UI that Denise's team has developed. It's similar to what Privacy Lens does, but it's slightly different. But it should be able to tap into the same pieces of infrastructure for scalability and sustainability. Because of some work that's been done by Internet 2 more generically, consent management has become front and center of identity management. It's in its own domain, and the consent manager work that we're doing will be a standalone module, a complete open source identity management suite that we're developing. Next. Some important metrics for MFA is not the number of licenses or the number of tokens. It's the number of applications that an enterprise has that uses MFA, and that's what we're starting to track now. And it's very interesting. It's a sign of the maturation. We're doing MFA to be not multi-factor authentication, but mature factor authentication. As we're beginning to understand this, we're starting to work now with accessibility and multi-factor authentication to make sure that the second factor is accessible to people with challenges and disabilities. So it's all around these additional considerations on how we would measure MFA. So it's not just the integrations you have on campus, but it's the number of external third parties that use MFA installations. And as a telling sign of the traction, we are now starting to include within the in-common metadata whether or not an IDP has capability to do MFA. It's a tag on an IDP, and that way relying parties can go, oh, gee, users on these locations can now do MFA. We'll ask that they do that. This is not a bandolier of tokens. This is one token being carried by a user. It might be a soft token or a hard token, but whatever it is, it's one token usable at hundreds of other relying parties. That's the leverage of federation in MFA. Lesson learned is that the schema are important. If we have understandings of what we're passing, then the relying party does the wrong thing with the information. So these schema are critical so that the payloads in the trucking system of the IDESG are consistent. And particular identifiers fit that space. And so we see people using identifiers as anchors when we know that identifier might be reassigned by the IDP. Think Yahoo. Think the Yahoo email address. It can be reassigned by Yahoo if you as a relying party are using that as your anchor for an identity, then you're vulnerable. Marks are critical. Lots of other pilots, most notably GTRI, has worked this space. One distinction between the GTRI approach and ours is that our trust marks will, on many occasions, be visible to end users to help guide the consent decision. So we're making sure that there are logos and icons associated with the the trust marks. A selective release of values from a multi-valued attribute is very hard. And unfortunately, LDAP, Source Active Directory, most identity management software packages use multi-valued attributes, in particular for group memberships. And so we're left with a situation where a user at a particular university might have 1,000 group memberships in there, is a member of attribute. How do we just release a few of those? It's a hard problem. It's a very hard from the UI viewpoint. We don't want to give a person 1,000 choices and have them check boxes. It's hard from an infrastructure view. We're working on that, which is to develop alternatives so that we can find the number of use cases, and then we're going to have to build an audit infrastructure for a minimum and appropriate release of attributes. Stuff that you'll see in the ID ESG framework as well, about this concept of required versus optional attributes. And lastly, in this generic lessons learned, non-credentials, which was a touch point for our project, still are really hard to deploy. They remain really elegant technology, and they're just several steps short of a deployable infrastructure. Next slide, please. Of lessons in consent management. Consent management at scale is viable. We were unsure. We're going to need infrastructure. You saw our work around that. Applications don't know how to do data minimization. Very privacy preserving. Most lead with a request for identity when at that juncture, all you need is a stateful experience, and you can choose to release identity at the appropriate later time in your engagement with that application. So this is going to be one of the hardest parts of building an identity ecosystem, is helping relying parties and applications understand how you leave privacy and you add identity as appropriate. It's really important. You saw an application earlier that demonstrated different behaviors. We had to look pretty hard to find applications where different release policies created different behaviors. You need to guard against habituation, oppressiveness. So I think we have to be very careful about we're doing consent that confine the user engagement to times when it's not intuitive what the flow of information might be to the user. The research from Carnegie Mellon suggests that habituation increases when you're asked to consent to things that you expected to happen properly anyway. So it's tricks like this that we're going to need to learn. We're going to need to make sure that relying parties do have opportunities to ask for more information, typically by providing users with rubber squeeze toys, as it were, in return for that information. And there are multiple approaches to informing consent. Next slide, which I believe is the next to the last. Just some things about federation. We would note that the functional model right now for IDSG is lacking a definition of federation, and I've volunteered along with some others to help flesh that out. But lessons we've learned, that the future of federation is interfederation. We're doing it now at large scale globally with R&E federations. It is very, very hard to do. It's not because we're using different technologies. We're all using pretty similar technologies. We can all aggregate our metadata, but mean different things by our attributes. So, for example, in the United Kingdom, affiliations you can have with an institution are only staff and students. There is no faculty affiliation. Whereas in the U.S., we define affiliations to include faculty, students, and staff. So if we pass an attribute of faculty to a UK relying party, they don't know what to do with it. Cultural differences. Second lesson learned is that the future of federation is multi-protocol endpoints. It isn't going to be a war between SAML and OpenID Connect. It's going to be all of the above. It's going to be UMA endpoints, all in the metadata. There are conversations now starting in Kantara about multi-protocol federations, a goodness. Lastly, the future of federations is multiple data types and sources of authority for them. So increasingly, the federated operator is an aggregator of secure bindings of signing keys to organizations or individuals. That's the core business of the Federation. And as long as we have that infrastructure, why many other sources of authority use that? Well, they're now starting to knock on our door and saying, gee, can you carry our signing keys, our attributes to all of these other endpoints because you're a trusted source, because shipping 15 megabytes of data 4 times a day to 700 organizations that are listening to this. So we'll be going into that space, and to do that, we need dynamic metadata, much we needed NS to replace Etsy host, and that is now an IETF standard. Next slide, which I think is just bullet points for more information. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ken, and thank you for all the presenters for providing your updates to the IDSG. So at this point, we're going to be moving into the Q&A section. I'll be going over the questions that have been inserted into the chat. If you do have any additional questions, please continue to input them. Just to level set a little bit, there are a few questions regarding the presentations and the recording. As we stated, this is being recorded, this presentation, and it will be available online. Also, the individual presentations will be available online as well, either in PDF or PowerPoint versions. Getting to the individual questions that were submitted, this is to Michigan. It feels like KBA is the only linking of the presenter with the identity info before the MFA process. Is there potential for others at the same address to fraudulently associate with the identity? Maybe KBA at the end helps mitigate the risk. That's a question for Michigan.
I am very sorry, Phil. Could you please repeat that? I'm not seeing it on my screen.
It feels like the KBA is the only linking of the presenter with the identity information before the MFA process. Is there potential for others at the same address to fraudulently associate with the identity? Maybe KBA at the end will help mitigate that risk.
So I guess I'm trying to understand, within the actual process of applying online, is the question that the KBA is the only verification of the person's identity prior to, I guess, for lack of a better term, case development or eligibility determination?
So this question is submitted online, so I'm going to be reading between the lines a bit. But I think this is in line to when the applicant is providing their information to set up the KBA, or set up the MFA from the email and or the cell phone, it appears that to that point there's just the KBA linking to the username and password that was set previously,
So at the point of just someone would be going into check benefits, report changes, they have an open case. DHS would be receiving benefits, so eligibility would have been determined, and depending on the type of benefits that they're receiving, there have been any other number of verifications completed. So isn't the only information submitted or that's part of that person's when they associate with their MyBridges account. Okay.
Great. So I think the address, the email address, or the cell phone number that a user can select as their MFA option is a either address or telephone of record per se. Is that correct?
Potentially.
What the client has said.
Potentially, we'd have information for that person, including their address, perhaps a landline, and house numbers, someone associated with the case, a whole array of information that's collected in the application process.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. And there's another question that just came up regarding Michigan. There's an edge of information security that says don't roll your own authentication, encryption, etc. Can you comment on why you decided to roll your own MFA rather than use a vendor-provided or supported solution?
At one point of time, Hi, this is Vidya, Deloitte, Michigan. So at this point of time, we already have a functionality that is in place for validating mobile, and that's what we try to use. But these are the information attested by the user. So this information, whatever we are trying to get them, the identification code is saved anywhere, not associated to a client or something. So when all we are doing in MFA is using the information attested by the user and putting them the identification code to those communication preferences.
Another aspect of that, Phil, is that the in-house capability offers the flexibility moving forward so that a portion of what we're doing here is native and not dependent on the vendor.
Great. Michigan team. The questions are for Pennsylvania. Is integration time/cost with RP's existing processes and technologies a major or minor inhibitor?
Depended on the agency in question. Some agencies, cost was not a major factor. For other agencies, on a tighter budget, certainly was. The other of that, too, is the timing. Trying to mate up an existing development schedule or planned release schedule with years of our grant proved difficult at times.
Thanks, Frank. Not seeing any additional questions on Pennsylvania. Moving on to the CSDII and AMBA teams. Could the protocol mapping learnings be pushed somewhere for others to follow, such as Open Identity Foundation or OASIS?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's been our intent. We've been trying to push through in getting it into some tangible form, and I know we've started having some conversations, with the MPO about, where's the best way to kind of represent this. I know we're looking, to bring some of it, to the HEART working group and some of these others, but absolutely, I definitely think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity to kind of, start bringing this into the conversation and then hopefully help inform some of the practical piece of it and then, try to actually, some of these SDOs in kind of helping materialize it into something tangible long term.
Mike. So the next question, I believe it's pertaining to UCAID. Will you be looking at the FIDO UAF and U2F protocols as a basis for deploying some crypto-based MFA?
Certainly. FIDO only covers, however, the linkage between the device and the commands to invoke second factor. FIDO itself doesn't have the management capabilities, the ability to identify which applications might need MFA, what to do if an MFA token has been reissued, etc. So FIDO is core to our vision. It helped offload a whole set of concerns about device dependencies, but FIDO by itself does not address the management capabilities that an enterprise might need to properly do multi-factor authentication.
So those are the questions that have been entered into the chat. If you do have additional questions, please continue to enter them. I have just a few questions that perhaps I can ask across the panelists, and maybe we can go from the order of the presenters. But the question would be, understanding that your pilot has many impacts that you would have on your constituents and your communities of interest, what would you characterize as the single largest point of impact your pilot has on your users?
So we're hopeful that it's privacy enhancing for our users, so protecting their identities within, I guess, this universe of interaction with government. We hope that it's ultimately going to reduce fraud, so be a deterrent for those who might be thinking bad actors within the system. So it's kind of those twofold pieces, so being a deterrent for those that shouldn't be there, but being privacy enhancing for those that need to be there, need our services.
Great. Thanks, Kat. Pennsylvania?
Pretty much the same, since like Michigan, we're a state government. Also, in our case, I think it helps our citizens, our constituents to access services online without having to be identity checked or registered with multiple applications and agencies.
Thanks, Frank.
Hey, it's Mike. I know it's coming up next, so I took myself off mute. I think the two biggest things for us have been, the ability to push out, privacy and user choice. I think those have been the real, the real key value adds that we've been, kind of advocating and pushing for.
Great. Denise from Privo?
Phil. So I think for us, one is, we've had to educate people, parents specifically, about their parental rights and responsibilities on introduce to these parents what it means to have to verify your identity, and to try to explain to them that the process is hard at first. If you can leverage that going forward, then you can, get on to actually managing the consent process, which is what's important for a child. And I think that in general, just bringing, knowing that there is a use case that is special and unique around delegated consent, and what parents and children do on one bookend, I hope to be able to do with my father on the other bookend. And so how our services, I believe, will play to the other bookend.
Thanks, Denise. And Ken, what is your thought on your largest impact?
Well, I'd like to offer two, Phil. The first is the deployments. I think it's gone significantly better than we expected, and I think we're at a tipping point. That's not to say that everyone in the R&E community will have MFA capabilities, but it is to say that those people who have access to sensitive data will have MFA capabilities, and relatively soon. There was a saying about what you do with your data is okay, what you do with other people's data is not okay, and so one of the important deploy points has been to people who manage other folks' data. Second, I think contribution has been around consent management, the idea that it's now its own domain, a standalone mechanism that fits into a general purpose identity management suite that's multi-protocol, that's informed from external sources. I think consent management is a field that's about to bloom.
Thanks, and thanks for panelists for your responses. I have more questions. I don't see any more coming through online, but another question for the panel. How do you see the identity ecosystem framework that's currently being developed in the IDSG impacting your community of interest? Maybe just keep this open. I encourage you guys just to speak up. We can maybe start with the states.
Well, Phil, this is Denise. I would say that the work being done by the IDSG regarding the trust framework is going to certainly inform the work that we did at the Miners Trust Framework, and I believe that it adds a tremendous amount of credibility when I'm talking to potential relying parties or just organizations that are certifying at Privo, that there's a bigger ecosystem that exists and that they are part of that. So being able to point to a body of work that's in line with the work that we're evangelizing about is really critical.
Yeah, and this was actually going to echo a little bit of what Denise said. I mean, the things that, we ended up, it was an uphill battle, quite frankly, in evolving our trust framework, because that's one of the key components when you have a lot of public-private partnerships, that are being involved in this, and having a tangible and credible and reputable thing to align with is important. And I think, coupling that with involving a lot of these standards and bringing out through these, standards development organizations, OAS, ODI, and all those folks are going to be instrumental in, like as Denise saying, in making it real and making it something that people will look at and say, yep, we behind that, and we recognize that, and it just makes the conversations a lot easier downstream.
Thoughts on the identity system framework from either Pennsylvania or Michigan or UK?
Phil, Frank here. Having an official stamp on standards like this, I think, helps with acceptance of this type of credential, and particularly not so much citizens, perhaps, but for other interactions our state does with other states and federal agencies and such. For example, our Justice Network people are working very closely with GTRI and their Trustmark work. It helps facilitate that type of interaction a great deal.
This is Ken. I'd offer up the IDESG work has moved into more substantive levels recently, and the specificity we're seeing in the new frameworks and the guidelines and the non-normative information, et cetera, is all very real. Speaks to those of us who have boots on the ground. It feels like it can actually be adopted and implemented. So I think that the IDEF and the IDSG have turning points in their efforts, and I look forward to working on that more.
This is Kathy. I would just mirror what Frank said from Pennsylvania, but also just add, we've talked many times about the fact that we would have benefited greatly from having some of these stand in place, ahead of the pilot, but that's why we're here, I guess, to provide some of that learning to support creating those standards. And I think that particularly state agencies benefit from having that additional guidance moving forward, as it seems like we're continuing to move further and further in the direction of this kind of identity management within the government space particularly.
Great, thank you. I see there's some additional questions that were asked via the chat, but I think individual pilots have answered them directly, so I don't think I need to address them here. But perhaps a a last question for the panel would be, understanding that many of you are operational, and you've had some lessons learned and some feedback from your users. What do you guys see as gaps that you have from either a technology standpoint on capabilities around federated identity, or gaps in policies or rules that you see that could help your operational pilots? What are some of these gaps that you've identified? Open to the panel.
Frank, we had gaps in our state policies. We have been addressing. Some of them are going through an approval process now. Not quite as rigorous as NIST policy review process, but it is in its works at this point.
Kathy from Michigan. I think one of the frustrating things for us is trying to operate within the conflicting rules coming from federal government agencies, and then even in our state government enterprise, trying to agree on what's allowable, what's not allowable, while we're trying to stay within the rules of those federal agencies. That's been a real struggle. Something that I would encourage anyone who has influence on some of those federal agencies to get theirs together to kind of come to agreement on what some of those rules should be would be fantastic. So, Phil, if you could work on that for us, we'd be grateful.
And this is Ken. Phil, while you're working on that, also the functional model needs to be enhanced to address the control plane for the identity ecosystem. Right now it talks about the transactions and the transactions, but it mentions nothing about the control plane for those transactions. The trust market words, et cetera, they're all lumped into an unexplored category called intermediaries. And my guess is that we really do need to flesh out the role at the management and control plane of the ecosystem, and that once we do that, we'll have clarity about some of the refinement of roles at the actual transaction layer.
I have a handful of things. One is, critical mobile is, and to the adoption of our service, they would rather test out and try it on their mobile apps and services before the web. So in improving our mobile capability. The fact that international identity verification and management is very difficult for us coming to the U.S. We don't have the same methodologies available to us. That's a gap. And probably most important to me is that out to create a privacy-enhancing service when we thought that we would reduce the number of username and passwords parents and children had to create and reduce the amount of personal information to verify your identity so that we could get economies of scale. But as far as we were at the time, we now find ourselves behind, and that is that our area requires us to manage different roles along the functional framework. We have to find a way to separate our intermediary service so that it's more privacy-preserving and be able to offer services at the endpoints, whether that's parents accessing us or the client sites and services accessing us. So big, in my opinion, gap is that our architecture needs to be improved so that we can protect our customers from ourselves and mistakes that we might be able to make.
Great. Well, thank you once again, panelists, for presenting your solutions and lessons learned to the IDSG. and thank you for your participation in the Q&A. Thank you for those that have attended this afternoon. We hope this session has been informative. Again, this recording will be available online afterwards, and the presentations will be available as well on the IDSG website.